with Elena Asciuti, which has done many emissions in the past. So I'm very glad to be here and starting this 1 hour long session where we'll be interviewing different panelists that during this morning and early afternoon have talked about many different political and research related topics that we're researching here at the EUI. Hello, Elena.
Hello, good afternoon, buon après-midi, buon pomeriggio. I'm Elena Asciuti, indeed, Alexander. I'm very familiar to this fantastic radio page because every 2 Fridays I run the radio show called Diffusione Fiaba. Allow me for 2-second advertisement, which is, I think, the oldest Radio Cavolo show, and it focuses on storytelling and the power of fairy tales, even in the 21st century. So whenever you want, we are there to tell you beautiful stories. But today we want to say the story about the EUI 50th anniversary, and through the protagonists, the characters of the research festival that for the first time the EUI launched to celebrate indeed this very important milestone, and happy to be together with you. It will be a lot of fun.
It's a great pleasure. We've had a very long day today. Started very early, and events just keep on going everywhere at the Badia. It is such a vibrant time to be here. There's high-level speakers. I just saw Franz Timmermans, the big EU Green Deal guy, that was here to talk about climate policy this morning. And yes, so we had heads of states yesterday. Did you manage to see the introduction ceremony yesterday?
Indeed, I was there, Alexander, and it was magnificent. Of course, to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Secondly, to reinforce the relationship with the city of Florence. Indeed, the ceremony was a host at the Maggio Fiorentino, which is the opera theater of the beautiful city of Firenze. And when it's a theater, it's always a place where different kind of people gather besides academia. And I had a great pleasure to be the liaison contact of Professor Sabino Cassese, who was the first winner of the EUI Awards for Imagining the Future of Europe. And indeed, it was a very touching ceremony, even because we had an experienced person like Sabino Cassese, who has been an intellectual leader through the history of Italy and Europe, and then going through several important high-level representatives from EU institutions. And at the same time, we had the next generations, because there were several students on stage from one of the many high schools in Firenze sharing their ideas of future Europe. So indeed, and did you enjoy it?
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. It's interesting you mentioned Sabino Cassese. Maybe not everyone knows that his brother is also a very good friend of the EUI, as he, indeed, I think, gave part of his private collection to the EUI archives.
Just let me tell you that was the brother, Antonio Cassese.
Antonio Cassese,
but indeed,
exactly.
This shows
I was mentioning the brother.
Sorry, my bad. And I gave it for granted because as Italian we all know the Cassese family has a very important...
I discovered that they were brothers yesterday. I had to look up on Wikipedia, and I was very surprised to see the connection.
Exactly. But as you said, very good friends and supporter of the EUI. And now I think we can give the welcome to our first guest of the afternoon session, Alexander.
Yes, so we have here now Mr. Giancarlo Corsetti. Sorry for my pronunciation.
Perfect pronunciation.
Which was part of the panel the early afternoon on the European social model, knowledge for a new era. So you have co-hosted this panel this morning. Could you briefly tell us what was discussed during this panel and what are the main points that that comes out of this discussion?
Yeah, the panel was envisioned as a way to remind us that in this new world of geopolitical fragmentation and crisis, Europe has to value its own asset. And one of the assets that the Euro has is the social model, the welfare state, the social security. There is a sense in which we run into difficulties because of fiscal space, because of opposition. But at the end of the day, we live in a world where more and more we have shocks and disturbances coming from abroad of increasing intensity, increasing frequency, and keeping Europe together will be one of the elements that will be essential for us to meet the challenge. Clearly, we used to think that there was a trade-off between efficiency and equity. So you get the social model by renouncing equity. There is evidence that it's not like this. Then, of course, when you open the hood and you look inside, there are issues. So like one of the presenters showed that the amount of discrimination, while the social model is really correlated to innovation and growth, especially in the Nordic countries. So there is an element which there is no trade-off between efficiency and equity. You can be equitable and efficient at the same time. When you look into discrimination, the discrimination is actually the same everywhere. And that raises issue in the fact that to have a sustainable social model, you need to have some degree of homogeneity in the society, and the some degree of homogeneity in the society may come at the cost of us and them, the kind of discrimination. This is one of the presenters. The other presenter was from the OECD, and he talks about climate and the problem that climate may create for especially the bottom part of distribution. And there the issue is how to basically defend and compensate. And again, here is an issue because people may value status more than income. So just giving money is not enough for people losing their identity, their status. I can go on in the other two presenters, but if you want to interact,
sure. I jump in immediately, Giancarlo, and thank you again. Grazie di nuovo for being with us this afternoon on Radio Cavolo. My question is very simple. It regards young people. First of all, how would you explain to a young person what is the social model and what kind of perspective could someone that today is 15, 20 years old have in his or her future when it comes to the social model?
That's, in general, how would you explain to people, but especially to young people, this? One point that is essential for us is that looking into the past, to the experience of our father and grandfather at this point is misleading, or it may be a source of irritation, especially the last generation. There is a sense in which we may move into something that maybe our great-grandfather experienced, which is, lifetime, changes in the trajectory in the lifetime. That's why I would explain, listen, we need to create a covenant across generation, across people, in which maybe keeping social services up, rethinking the way we give people health care, like unemployment benefit, help the accumulation of human capital, maybe moving back from a market-based explosion in the name of a fake efficiency. It is time now to rethink that. Now, it is not as easy, again, because there are issues with the amount of resources that we have. There are issues with, certain aspect in the climate. Think about climate change and the weight of all people. So let me respond to with an empty slogan. The fact that the aging population is so large, to me, means that we need to invest in the young people. It's the only. So people think of the aging population as a society in which we should put resources in the old people. I think it's exactly the opposite. We should get people, entrepreneurs, taking risk, having fulfillment of their lifetime ambitions and things. Without making money is fun. Having services is fun. People have different talents and different aspirations. We need to empower these talents and aspirations. that is the way we keep the society up, I think. But this is my personal opinion.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Very much appreciated. Alexander, would you like to continue?
Yeah, that's a very hopeful vision for Europe and for its European social model. I'm going to drop right into the elephant in the room, right? Which is that all over Europe for decades now, there's this constant discussion of the welfare state is in crisis. We spend too much money on social spendings, on healthcare spending, on pension spending, and we need to cut them in order to have prosperity back. And I understand that what the research that you discussed during this panel show is that it's actually quite the opposite in some respect. Could you, for listeners, explain them why this sort of dichotomy between prosperity versus welfare is not necessarily the right way to approach the problem?
Well, again, I can tell you what I think. Now, we still need to make it possible, but the answer is basically the real bottom problem here is productivity. We have an issue especially in Europe, in making sure that we have a system that can use the resources to deliver prosperity, not to waste resources. Young unemployment, young under-education is a waste of resources. So I think those are two seemingly contradictory statements. It's true, we don't have much resources left. On the other hand, the welfare state, the social model, is an enabler of risk-taking entrepreneurship. He can help people to move around until they get the job of which they're good at. They could help entrepreneurs to take risks, the startups. So there is a sense in which there is no contradiction there. Again, once I say this, I also tell you this will be my line of research with other people in the Institute for the next few years, but it's the bottom part is that we need to think better how not to follow the US or China. No, there's no catch-up, there's no competitive problem. There's a problem of productivity, which in my view in education is basically prosperity, not to waste talent, not to waste resources. Having people, and again, I insist on the issue of status, the fact that we cannot really compensate people with money. That's actually the other problem with the welfare state in the old times. Yes.
Thank you very much, Giancarlo. And we use this moment to welcome Professor Josephine van Zeben, Professor at the EUI and Provost for Education and Academic Staff Development. Thank you very much. And it's fantastic to have both of you here because one of the assets of the European University Institute is interdisciplinarity, and I think you both work on very important policy areas. I just would like to continue with Giancarlo, and then we pass to you, Josephine. You would not escape our questions. So I was wondering whether there is a good practice. I know that naming might be a dangerous exercise to perform, but whether there is a model we could inspire ourselves within the EU or even outside the EU. Would be that possible?
Social model.
Yes, a good practice, exactly.
Well, there is experience that we can draw on from the Nordic countries, like in the Florence report that is talking about interdisciplinary, 40 authors, 30 chapters, different views. Some of the authors talk about the Nordic countries, showing how basically they are all inducing more investment, more risk-taking, more productivity at the same time. They're not the same, they're different. There are countries that are more or less relatively homogeneous in the population. So replicating that in France, in Italy, in Germany may be a challenge, but this is why we call it EmuLab, in the sense it would be nice to have a kind of experimental mind to try to have a very critical, could be also a very critical review of these models. But I would start from there. I would start with the issue of flex security, and on the other hand, there is the big issue of the social, pension funds, which would be also very good for the financial side of the same problem.
Thank you very much. Alexander.
Josephine van Zeben, welcome and congratulations for hosting this panel this morning. There was a very, very crowded room and interactive discussions. So congratulations for that. I think everyone loved it. I recall that you had a vote at the beginning and at the end of the panel regarding whether climate expertise should supersede some democratic choices, and at the end of the discussion the room said no overall. Were you surprised by this result?
No, actually I was very, very surprised that in the beginning, so in the initial vote, it was very tight. So we had almost I think we had maybe 4 votes more for no than for yes. And I was really surprised by this, because when we were preparing for this session, our assumption was that everybody was going to say, well, obviously, expert knowledge should not override democratic decision making. So we even, in deciding the panels, we were giving sort of, the easier argument to certain people, etc., because we were so convinced that it was going to be very obvious, everybody thinks this shouldn't happen, right? And actually, when we were in the room, it turned out that the initial vote especially was really almost 50-50. And I think even with the second vote, the final vote, I mean, the no's had done an exceptional job in arguing the case, right? So I think they really managed to sort of change some people's minds. But even then, it wasn't the case that everybody suddenly decided that no, expert knowledge should not override democratic decision making. There was still a healthy amount of people who thought that would be a good idea. So maybe this also shows my own bias on where I stand on this. But I was very surprised, actually. I think that was the most surprising thing about the whole session, that it wasn't more obvious from the beginning where people stood.
Thank you very much, Josephine. So I go back to the title of the panel, Who Decides on Our Climate? For those people that are listening and were not here in Firenze, do we have an idea? Because of course, there are the experts like you and many other colleagues here at the EUI. There are the policymakers, but there are a lot of private actors that are mingling into this discussion. So if you can give us a tweak of that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So actually that is not a question that was really central to, I know it might have seemed that way, but that was not the central question of the debate. So the central question of the debate was really this tension between expert knowledge on the one hand and democratic decision making on the other hand. I think the question that you're pointing to, though, is a very crucial sort of second layer, right? Which is, what do we do with private actors? What do we do with different kinds and different levels of policymakers? What do we do with different kinds of expertise? And it was touched upon in the debate, and I think one of the examples that was brought up several times was, what do we do with the Elon Musks? What do we do, and this is a very urgent question, I think. That came out more, I think, in the discussion of what is expertise and what is democratic decision making, right? Because I think those kind of questions, however at the forefront they are within climate, they're not questions only for climate, right? I think it's a question in general, what do we do with private interests which have taken a shape and a form that is so significant now that in a way, should we treat them more with the same kind of safeguards and the same kind of scrutiny maybe that we treat some public actors, right? So I think that is a long-standing discussion, and I think it's coming to the fore now in different kind of ways, especially also when you think about AI, when we think about technology. So we did discuss that, but we didn't sadly come to a conclusion on that question because it was slightly tangential to what we discussed. Yeah,
maybe to go back on this question of what's the role of experts in policymaking, and maybe for both of you, you're both researchers and producing research that aim to have a policy impact. What do you think, in your experience, in your professional experience also, is the impact of the kind of research that we do at the EUI, and how do policymakers listen or sometimes don't listen to what we try to explain in our works?
Well, this is basically one of the major concentration of my work. If you look at, now Josephine is from Holland, Holland we had a major contribution by a Nobel Prize called Tim Bergen, who sort of created this idea that the economics could be used as an instrument of democracy to basically listen to policymakers, derive implications and telling people what are the implications of the promise of the policymaker. And the slogan was to take the promise of the policymaker out of the slogan into reality. This was it's still there, like the Central Planning Bureau is still there, they're still doing it. Over time, what we are seeing is a major investment to deconstruct this. Actually, there are beautiful books, The Great Persuasion, that shows how over time people have invested into making sure that has been a undermining of this public service or social. I talk about economics, but I'm sure other disciplines have the same idea. So basically, at this point, we have, as of today, there is a wall of money coming from U.S. conservative that is trying to, through foundations, to install the doubt and undermine expertise. So this is why EUI could be one of the strongholds of thinking not only about creating good analysis, but how to interact in the cultural policy of explaining, convincing, creating narratives, if you like this word, enriching people and policymakers. This is an open debate. It's not. There is no technical answer. It's a true. It's the politics of knowledge in a way, right? Because knowledge per se needs to be explained. Need to persuade people, and that will take time and patience, I guess.
I obviously don't have the kind of experience as, I don't want to, I'm at the beginning, I think, of my career in terms of like making that kind of policy impact. I would be very, very grateful if I could look back and have the kind of impact that Giancarlo's had. But I think one of the reasons for me to come to the EUI was actually exactly this. So I'm at the SCG, and it's for me, it's a vehicle to have exactly that kind of collaboration. And I think before I came to the EUI, I was at a university in the Netherlands called Wageningen University, which is a life sciences university, and they do very applied, well, it's not applied, they do very fundamental research, but mostly in the life sciences, to do with agriculture, food, etc. And they have an extremely direct policy impact, because part of the university is also a former research institute of the Dutch government, and there's really close ties, and there's a whole infrastructure that allows that continuous conversation between the government and the Dutch government in this case, and the research. And I think that's really something that I see now also developing within the EUI, and that I really want to learn from, because I think one of the things that I've really seen, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, is that it is very difficult to conduct a research project and then be at the end and be like, well, now I'm going to give a couple of policy papers to these people, and then they're going to just copy-paste that into legislation, for example. No. That's not how it works. I mean, from my experience, from what I've seen in Wageningen and also now increasingly here and other places, is that if you want to have a policy impact, you need to design the research project with that in mind, and be sure that you bring in stakeholders, that you have the kind of questions that actually allow for that kind of impact. And I think that's something that, and I don't think every research project has to have that, right? I think there are different kinds of research projects, there's different kind of researchers, and I think, I find it incredibly satisfying to sometimes have a research project where I know the impact is going to be very concrete, and then I also deeply love sometimes having a completely abstract, theoretical, academic research project, which is really more just about, concept development and just very different in its application. And both, I think, can have great policy impact, but in different ways, right? So this is a...
Can I interrupt?
Yeah,
because
sure.
I see Anton coming to replace me. I want to say two things.
Yes, please.
Wageningen is a powerhouse. My daughter actually went to Wageningen.
Yes.
And it's truly a good model, actually. It could be too specialized for us, but it's a model of, we live not only with silos in our discipline, but we also have silos between us, the industry. So there is a sense. And I want to tell this story. Like in 2010, Marco Del Panta, then Secretary General, came to me in the corner, and we had a cappuccino. We said, why don't we do State of the Union? He said Marco idea. And I did all the little program with research and things. And he said, no, we need to have something different. And he was completely right. So this today, the 50th anniversary comes into the development of this idea that to place the UI into a dialogue, which I think is something that we should really value and cherish, and it's one of the best things we do, and it's important for all the community, researcher and faculty, to be very much So I don't know how it will go ahead. And today is a good example. We can even multiply the idea. But in the future, I think breaking the silos will be essential for us.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I think this is a fantastic way to conclude, and it's a wish for the future of the EUI. Indeed, yesterday we talked about the next 50 years of the EUI, so I think this could already be a good wish for the future. Thank you for coming, Giancarlo. In the meanwhile, I welcome Professor Mafalda Damaso. Thank you for being with us. But we finished the interview with Josephine because you touched, together with Giancarlo, of course, a very essential point, how to break the silos, how to ensure interdisciplinarity. And you also mentioned that you are a professor at the School of Transnational Governance, where there is a master in transnational governance with students. And I made a next generation question also to Giancarlo, so Mafalda, get prepared. Because yes, 50 years, but we also need to look at the future. So how to convey this message to possible future leaders and academics that are now currently studying at the Master in Transnational Governance, because this is a kind how to forge a mindset, right? To work more across the sector, across policy. Voila, open to you.
So nobody listens to this, right? There's not a big audience for this, right? I'm going to say some controversial things, right?
Please,
so
thank you.
I actually don't think that's a question at all, because I work with these students every day, and they come to the EUI because they know that nothing that they're going to do in their professional life is going to be disciplinarily constrained, right? They need to understand the language of other disciplines. They need to be able to address these incredibly complicated problems in a way that brings in things from all kinds of disciplines. So I don't need to explain this to them at all. They come to me. They come to me and they say, like, "Why am I doing transnational law? Why am I doing anything to do with law? Tell me how this matters for this interdisciplinary life that I'm going to lead." Right? And then I try to do that. So I don't think they're the problem. I think, quite frankly, we're the problem. Right? I think a lot of professors, and I say this with a lot of respect and appreciation for my colleagues, but also the academy as a whole, I think we're the problem, right? Because the issue is, if you're an academic, you are hugely rewarded for being very disciplinarily precise, right? The more niche your research, the better, right? I don't want you to be an international criminal lawyer. I want you to be an international criminal lawyer who only focuses on the International Criminal Court. You know, like, the more specific you can be in your profession, the better. And I think that's really a shame, because even though I think a lot of people have a passion for doing more interdisciplinary work, it's very difficult to build a very respected academic career by publishing the kind of work that falls between different disciplinary journals, for example, right? It's very difficult. It is also, admittedly, extremely difficult to be truly inter- or multidisciplinary in your work, right? Because it means that you don't know just one language of one discipline, but you know several languages of several disciplines, several methodologies. And to be frank, there's also a lot of really bad interdisciplinary work out there, right? So and this doesn't help, because that, of course, then reinforces this idea that to be a good academic, you have to be a disciplinary academic. So I think, again, I don't think the problem is the student. They know what they want. I think also professional life that they go into, which is not academia, tends to be a bit more open to this. I think academia is not there, though.
Thank you very much, Josephine.